Hello, beautiful. And what I'd like to know is what's good in your life today? I'm Kia, and this is another episode of the Female Veterans Podcast. Today, I have with me Rachel, and she is a Navy shipmate. And you know how excited I am when I have a shipmate in the house. So, you know, I'm on 10 right now. I'm absolutely on 10. Now, Rachel's incredibly special because she's doing the job. She's out here doing the work, helping people through sharing stories, just like I do. Her podcast, Your Story Doesn't End Here, is one of my favorite podcasts and one that I've been on. So you can go check out my episode as well and go support her podcast because we're all out here doing this work and we got to support each other. And when one goes up, we all go up. So go show some love to her podcast. All right. So with that said, I want to shout out my sponsor, Grunt Style. As you know, you can go to gruntstyle.com and get 10% off your order if you use code Baker for your first order and check out their stuff. I love it. I have a ton of their t-shirts. I work out in them. I run around in them. I like the style. And they're also owned and operated largely by veterans. They have a really fantastic foundation doing good work out here too. So check out the Grunt Style Foundation as well and go buy their stuff and support them. All right, it's veteran owned. What else can I say? So with that, I want to jump right into it and say, welcome, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My daughter's back there also saying hello.
Hey, girl. Hey. Well, I'm glad she's here with us. And I want to ask you just straight away, what made you join the Navy?
I joined the Navy for, I think, a reason why a lot of people joined the military. And it was just to do something different with my life, to just change the trajectory of my life. The short answer to that was to get out of Iowa. And because I had gotten out of a really, really toxic relationship pretty recently. And on a deeper level, a lot of it had to do with taking back control of my life. And that's something I reflected on later in life, but realizing that, I didn't have a lot of control in a 3-year toxic relationship. And I was at a point where I was like, you know what, I'm not going to allow someone to tell me what to do and how to live my life. And I'm going to do this for me. And so, yeah, I kind of different layers there as to why I joined, but just to do something different, change the trajectory.
I feel that. Well, of course, everyone who listens to this podcast knows I was forced into it by my mother. But I chose the Navy. I chose the Navy because, well, the short story is my recruiter said it would be fun in the Navy. And I was coming out of private school. It was really strict. And I thought the military is going to be strict. So I need to choose a branch where I can have some fun. And let me tell you, I did have fun in the Navy. I had more fun than anybody should have until the day I didn't. So, what was boot camp like for you?
So boot camp, I like to describe as disappointing. It was fun,
Really?
don't get me wrong, but I had this idea in my head of what boot camp was going to be like. And you see the movies, you see all the stuff that's like, oh, it's super hard, it's going to break you. And I think that's more of a description of probably a Marine Corps boot camp.
Yeah.
But at the time that I entered the Navy in 2015, the Navy had gone through some significant changes. And so maybe back in the day, boot camp was difficult. But when I went through, a lot of the leaders, the male leaders, were really, really weird about how they should treat women because of all the sexual assault prevention and response stuff that had recently come out, all the changes in the rules. And so they were very, very like walking on eggshells when it came to women. And so I think that was a huge contributor to my disappointing experience. But I also just felt like it didn't challenge me like I expected it to. I expected to be, I don't know, I almost yelled at more, which is crazy because I don't think that that's like a great leadership style. But I also think that that's kind of expected in boot camp, right? You expect to be yelled at and you expect to be, disciplined for, screwing up and stuff. And I saw so many things get swept under the rug that shouldn't have been from people around me that I was like, oh, well, anyone can pass this. It's not a challenge at all.
That's what boot camp was like for you? Because I sure as shit
Oh,
remember
yeah.
getting screamed at and cycled and beat down and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I'd say the hardest part was the first like 24 hours when you come in. Like, and even then, I didn't feel like it's probably more the fear of the unknown than anything, and then the sleep deprivation. But Like, it wasn't anything where I felt like, "Oh my gosh, what did I get myself into? Like, I need to go home," kind of thing. It was just kind of like, I'm really tired. I want to go to bed. Like, that was probably the most challenging part. But at the end of the day, it was people are gonna let the older veterans are gonna laugh at this. But like the food that we got at the galley, we had like cookies and all kinds of like, yeah. I ate snickerdoodle cookies. We ate
Wait,
very
what?
well. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Halfway through, this is gonna make you laugh. Halfway through, so my sister division, they were like, I don't know, doing really well or something. And so their RDC let them go to the next and get candy in the middle of boot camp. Okay. So they're sitting in the middle of the birthing with their Sour Patch Kids, their candy. Yes, smack in the middle of boot camp. They
Wow.
were playing music on a boombox for us. Like, they'd wake us up in the morning playing music on a boombox or something. It was just like it wasn't what
What?
I expected. Yeah, it's wild. And I don't know. I don't know if it was just the RDCs that I had and they just wanted to go against the grain of thing. I don't know. I'll have to ask them because I'm still friends with them on social media to this day. But it was just not what I expected, and it was a little disappointing because when you sit there at the end of everything, battle stations happens, and battle stations, by the way, like it was another one of those things that like you couldn't fail. They tell you not to talk about it. You sign the page 13 and everything, but like, at the end of the day, like again, it was the sleep deprivation that made it hard. But if I failed an evolution during battle stations, like they helped me get through it and everyone passed. So it was like one of those things. Yeah, I'll tell you a specific example. Like I had a rack mate who, folding your clothes is like the baseline of Navy boot
Yeah.
camp, right? This girl threw her clothes into her rack, did not fold them at all. And she still got through to the end. When we marched, she didn't march in cadence with anyone, still got through to the end. They did not, they called asthma, send them back.
Yeah.
I legitimately thought this girl was going to get asthma because she did not follow a single direction. She was just very like space cadet. And yeah, she still made it through to the end and passed. And I still remember her name to this day. But yeah, it's wild. I was like, man, this is not a challenge. Anyone can pass this thing. They just want to push people through. And maybe it was a time period where the Navy really needed people. And maybe that's why they were pushing people through like that. I don't know. But yeah, it just was not a challenge at all. And so I'm sitting there after battle stations and they're playing the like proud to be an American song and giving you your Navy ball cap. And I'm just like, well, I really had this idea in my head of how this experience was going to be. And I thought I was going to feel like I just overcame the biggest challenge of my life. And that's not how I felt at all.
Oh my God. I am shook right now. I am shook. Honestly, I mean, okay, so I'm gonna date myself right now, but all of you veterans, especially Navy veterans who served before 9/11 are probably just as shook as I am at this
Oh, yeah.
moment. That was very different than my boot camp experience whatsoever. Now, I will say that it was easier than I bet the Army or the Marines, but there were aspects that were really difficult and really trying. In addition to the like, of course, the sleep deprivation was, like, always a big one, but, I mean, I remember people definitely got asthma, people definitely were not pushed through, like, we were held to a strict standard, a strict requirement. We did have certain privileges because we were a 900 company, and we were, like, our company was half guys, half girls, so we didn't have a sister company, but our whole company was guys and girls. So guys barracks was just below us, and we did everything together. We marched together, we ate together, we did everything with our guys. And the one like sort of chill thing, I guess, that we did get to experience was because I went through the holiday season. So people's families sent all these care packages around Christmas. And because it was between I went just before Thanksgiving. So it was between that holiday time period, there was a lot of packages coming through, and we'd all go into the courtyard and eat cookies and like whatever treats that people's parents and family sent in. And I thought that was like, oh, we are so living our best lives because this makes boot camp so much easier and much more fun because we get to hang out for a few hours, eat cookies and treats, but we were getting beat. We, we were getting pushed, I mean, you guys, you went through the gas chamber and all of that, right?
Yeah, we did. And even that was like, even that for me was just like, like, I just didn't feel like that was because we only went in there. I don't remember exactly what we did in the gas chamber, but I don't think we were in there for very long. I know we all lined up. I think we just had to do like they said, mask up, cups up. So we had to hold our hand up by our mouth, take our mask off. And then I think we just had to say like the Sailor's Creed or something and then leave. And so it wasn't like we were in there for an extended period. Like I had a friend that went through Marine Corps boot camp and they stayed in there. Like I think they're doing like exercises in the gas chamber or something. I don't remember exactly, but
That's wild.
yeah, yeah, it's just different. And we were integrated too. I think they're all integrated now. Don't quote me on that,
Probably.
but the guys were across the hallway. The girls were in our berthing, but we had division 167 and 168 and we did everything together as like a sister division too, and like we did get beat mainly as a group, but there wasn't like a whole lot of individual ones, which I expected more of. And I felt like I saw a lot of like playing favorites between some RDCs and recruits and stuff, and that was a little strange to me. But yeah, I think I expected more of a level of strictness and discipline, and I think it just continues to get worse. And I obviously it's been since 2015, but as I look at what the military is doing, we're lowering the ASVAB score requirement to a 10 to get into the military. We just waived the PFT failure. We reset them. I mean, I know the military is in a place right now. They're really struggling. As we look at new generations and who qualifies to get in the military has to adapt to that. But I think when we're talking about a bigger conversation, the mental health piece, obviously something that I work very, very strongly in my field, the mental health and the leadership piece. I think if we looked at that, then we'd, instead of taking away from what the military is, we would give people a reason to want to join the organization and not have to do things like make boot camp easier for people to just push through because you're not getting a quality product.
No.
Referring to people as a product. You're not getting a quality product in the fleet when you're just saying like, oh, you know what, you bent that rule, but we're just going to slap you on the wrist. It's really setting a precedent for potentially the next 20 years of someone's career. And you don't know what kind of person you're pushing in. I mean, I've worked with people that have felonies on their records and they're in the military and I don't think they do that prison or military thing anymore, but I've
Mhm.
met people who said that they know people that are in that had that
I
choice. And
did.
so, yeah, yeah,
Mhm. I mean, I
yeah,
knew people, not that I had that
yeah,
choice, but I knew people. So I definitely feel what you're saying and about the product. Like as a member of the United States military, you are property. So you don't qualify as you are the product. And I
yep,
think lowering the standards and if we look at it like a corporation, right? You want to make the most profit. So you want to provide a value add. You want good quality products. So
right.
by lowering these standards and making boot camp easier, and I am the first to admit that my boot camp was challenging, but it was not as hard as I expected it to be either, we'll say, right? But I did absolutely notice favoritism and all of those kinds of things through boot camp and a school and as a staff and like okay through my whole career. All right, so
Yep,
it's nice to be the favorite. It sucks if you're not,
right.
and so it's just something you kind of adapt to. But I definitely feel what you're saying a lot, and I think that these requirements are damaging for the long term, security of the nation. To be honest, like just
Oh yeah.
bare bones,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And again, the Navy's always been the show of force branch, right? So they have to maintain a certain number of people to A, show the force, but B, I mean, when you look at these squadrons that are getting, underpaid, overworked because they don't have the people for it. I mean, there's a detrimental effect on so many levels, but then there's also a detrimental effect when you have people who aren't able to follow simple directions. And you think it's common sense, but I mean, I'm sure you served with the people before that can't even like basic hygiene. Like they just don't know. They were never even taught that stuff in their life. And yeah, I mean, you get them all in the military. So yeah, that's a whole different conversation
Yeah.
piece.
That's,
But yeah, it's
yeah.
I think that the military continues to take away from the requirements, which takes away from the experience, which takes away from the quality of the people that join. And there are good people that still go through. I served with some phenomenal people when I was in, but there's a few that I was like, I probably shouldn't have graduated from boot camp, or at least maybe got pushed back to remediate a few things, you know?
I feel you. Like, I just think back and I remember being in boot camp and seeing like big guys like sobbing their eyes out and trying to figure out how to get out while they were in boot camp because of the stress and how it was challenging. It was definitely challenging. So I can't even imagine just I mean, I know it's what's happening. It's not the first time I've heard it, but it's just every time it's amazing to me to think that people are getting pushed through that really shouldn't have qualified, like, they wouldn't have qualified 20 years ago to be in,
Right. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
It's wild.
It's incredible. So, did you, make a lot of good connections in boot camp? Because for me, I loved the girls that I went through boot camp with. It was such a bonding experience. Did you have that kind of experience as well?
Yeah, so I have a few friends from boot camp that I still talk to till this day. One of my friends, I went and saw her in Hawaii 2 years ago. Another one of my friends was out here in Washington with me, and she's back in New York now, but she's a good friend of mine. And I would say, that I have a lot of connections still on Facebook. I wouldn't consider every single person a close friend, but yeah, I there were some really, really good friends that I made that it's like, we went through some stuff together, and it's like that will always be our bond as friends. So, yes.
I love that. I think that's so special. We did not have, you know, we did not have mobile devices. So we just, email was relatively new, I guess. So it was a lot more difficult to keep in touch. There certainly was no Facebook. It wasn't even MySpace. It wasn't even on the horizon
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
was serving.
Social media helps a lot.
So it made it very difficult. So I say this every time, but if you served at Naval Great Lakes and you went to boot camp there and you went in the fall of in November 94, we might have served together. Hit me up. Look me up on Facebook or something. I'm trying to reach out to my boot camp sisters. You know who you are. So tell me what A school was like for you.
So A school for me was like I'm going to go in a little bit of a timeline here, but when I first got there, it was Florida and I'm from Iowa. So it's already like this environment that like a lot of Iowans go to Florida for spring break.
Mhm.
And so it was already like the overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, I'm in Florida and I get to live here for the next 8 months or whatever have you. And so that was like this overwhelming almost freedom aspect of it. But when you get to A school, they have you phase up. So you start in the phase one where you can't leave base at all. You have to wear your NSUs everywhere. When you go out, no civilian clothes. You're in that for like 2 weeks till you qualify for like a certain watch standing position or something. Phase two, you can go out, but you have to wear your NSUs out in town and you can't be out overnight, something like that. And then phase three is where you can stay out overnight. You can wear your civilian clothes. You can go out in town. And so right off the bat, I'm already breaking the rules because I want to go out in town. I want to go to the beach. I don't want to be in my NSUs because I think it's stupid. And so I remember there was one day that we were in like a force protection condition Bravo or something. And they were saying, listen, unless you're phase three, you're not leaving the base. And so I had to obviously leave the quarter deck in my NSUs. But what I did and what a lot of other people did was I just put like my civilian clothes in a backpack. I wore my NSUs out to the bus. And then when I got out to the bus, these girls saw me standing there in my NSUs with my other friends that we were all going to go to the beach together. And they're like, oh, we can leave base. And I'm like, no, we can't, but shut up, please. 'Cause I'm not trying to get in trouble. So, I mean, long story short, we ended up leaving base anyway. Somehow we pulled it off. I broke so many rules when I was in A school. It's insane because that's never the kind of person I was. It was a very rebellious time period of my life. Still went to the beach, changed into the clothes out there, still made it back, never got caught. But I think that really set the precedent for a lot of how I was in A school because I acted very, I'll say, out of character, which led up to me getting NJP'd at the very end of my time in A school. But I was drinking a lot because for the first time, again, freedom. I'd actually broken up with my boyfriend, my now husband, actually, right when I was in boot camp, because I felt like when we were in boot camp, I felt like long distance wasn't going to work very well for us. And so I broke up with him. And then I was newly single at this time too. And so I just like I went crazy and my intention, I guess, wasn't ever to go crazy in Florida for any reason, but I was drinking excessively. I was staying out all the time. I was spending money. I was just acting very erratically compared to what's normal for me. With that too, I gained a bunch of weight because I wasn't eating very well. I was eating a lot of really, really horrible food, like the A&W ice cream things with the M&Ms in them. I was eating like 3 of those a week, which a lot of calories and those, terrible idea. And all this built up to the right when I was about to get out of A school and get sent to my next command, which is where I still live to this day in Whidbey Island. I had gotten in trouble and I bought alcohol for 2 underage Marines, and I bought alcohol for them off base. But when they brought it onto base, they got caught only because they brought it. We mixed whiskey and Coke in a Coke bottle, and the building they brought it into didn't sell Coca-Cola. They sold Pepsi products only. So it was a red flag. And when they asked to sniff his drink, it had alcohol in it. He was underage. And then, everything rolled downhill from there. So it's kind of a blur in my life if I look back at it, because if could do it differently, I would. If I could do it differently, I still would have enjoyed my time there and explored like I did, but I wouldn't have taken as many risks as I did because that was my career on the line. Like I went to New Orleans one time and I wasn't supposed to go to New Orleans. Like that I was doing like very, very, very risky things that could have got me kicked out of the military for really no reason. I think it was just that I had grown up so sheltered, and it was like, this is my time now to just live my life, and not the time or place to do that. I could have done that at any time later, but we don't know what we don't know, and we live life as it comes. And I was still very young. I didn't feel like I was young. But I was in my early 20s. I was 22, I want to say, at that time. And so, just making these decisions on a whim as I felt like it. And so, yeah, I ended up spending 30 days in restriction at the very end of my time, right before I left Pensacola. And that was my introduction to my next command, was this girl that had spent time in a restriction, got in trouble with an alcohol related incident. And it really did affect that first part of my career, not super negatively. Thankfully, I didn't get busted down in a rank or anything, but they did tell me when I got to my first command that they didn't send me to a specialized school they're going to send me to because of my alcohol related incident, or ARI. But yeah, I think that, looking back at that experience, a lot of it had to do with me just dealing with life in the best way I could at that time. And between all the major changes and me trying to figure out who I was because I was still young, and this new career in the military, all these things combined, being around all these new people. I mean, there's so much there. That's why it was the way it was. But when we talk about like an actual like education aspect in A school, it was horrible. Like I had a Marine instructor and I was an AT, and I was an intermediate level AT, and an eye level AT is a challenging curriculum. And to this day, I still don't understand half of that stuff that I learned. But I remember being in my class and asking questions, and my instructors didn't know the answers to my questions. I had one Marine instructor who I would ask a question, he'd flip through his book and act like he was finding the answer, and then he wouldn't ever give me the answer, and he'd just move on with the curriculum. Yeah. When we got to our last block, because I don't know if block is the right verbiage, but we had different blocks of our curriculum in A school, and it was so challenging because no one was understanding. It was very fast paced. and it just wasn't catching on. And I wasn't failing by any means, but they want their classes to look good. So my last instructor actually gave us the answers to every single test ahead of the test. So all we studied was the yes, all we studied was the answers. And yeah,
What is going on in the Navy?
I know.
Like,
So
really?
he gave us the answers to every single test. So all we studied was the answers. And then he told us, he's like, make sure when you take the test, he's like, I can't have everyone getting 100%. So make sure some of you guys get some of the stuff wrong. And so I was like, well, I'm not going to be top of the class, because if you're top of the class, you got an automatic promote to E4 out of A school. But I already knew I wasn't going to be top of the class anyway. So I was like, cool, I'll get some purposely wrong. And so, yeah, to me, it was a very big waste of time from an educational standpoint, which is probably why the Navy changed the way they do A school. Now they have E1s that are coming into the fleet. So they're not spending as much time in A schools anymore. And I think they're trying to go to more of a hands-on approach, which would be better if the hands-on learning was good. But if you want to know, I can get into that too. You'll be just as shocked with that one. But
Mm.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so interesting to me, all of it. So I just want to back up. Like, so you when you were in A school, you were young, you're in your early 20s, and you rebelled. I did the same thing. Right. I think that it's
Yep.
like par for the course. Like I said, I was sheltered. I was in private school for most of my life growing up. And I left, I went on I enlisted in and when I was 17, and then I went on a delayed enlistment for after I graduated from high school. Right. And I went 6 months later. And I was really young. So I did all kinds of sort of shenanigans and stuff. I just didn't get caught, we'll just say. But even then, I just want to say that I think that's pretty normal, right? You're young. It's the first time you're on your own for a lot of us. And it's an exciting time, as a young, single, beautiful woman out there. Because let's face it, everyone's beautiful when you're 22. So, like, you're out there living your life and having adventures with new people and friends. And let's also point out that the Navy is a drinking culture. It is a drinking.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm pretty
Absolutely.
sure every branch is to a degree, but definitely in the Navy, it is a
Yeah.
drinking culture.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and they had an actual bar on the base there, like that alone. And they told me this with my ARI. They said the bar on base contributes to so many ARIs because it's there, it's readily available. And yeah, you're right. The Navy is a drinking culture. So when you give people the opportunity to drink to that capacity right out of being held down and restricted for 8 weeks, then I mean, what do you expect, right?
mhm, I agree. So then there's that, right? Then you have the curriculum. So for me, I was a hospital corpsman. And I felt that the curriculum was pretty challenging. We had great instructors. Granted, one of our instructors was sleeping with some of the students. So that was happening. All
Yeah.
right. I'm not, no, no tea, no shade, but that was happening. And so there was a lot of that. I was really good friends with one of my instructors, Petty Officer Arnold, was like a dream. He made the whole thing for me. And then I had another chief. I had some family problems at the time, and my mom had written to the command and because she hadn't heard from me, because I was like, I'm grown. I'm out. Like I'm doing my thing. And so
Yeah.
she didn't know how to get a hold of me. So she wrote to my command. So then I had to have this big meeting. And my chief was like really insinuating some stuff. And so from that point on, like that was one of my first sort of realizations that not everything is as you would expect it to be when you go into the military. So a lot of my idealistic, ideas, we'll say, started to get chipped away right from A school. But as far as the curriculum, I was not disappointed. We had a lot of PT. We could wear civilian clothes straight away. So that was, no issue. We also had a bar on the base. It was called the Helm, if anybody remembers. I think it turned into Club Nitro after that. But we had a lot of fun there, to be honest. But I was underage drinking. I didn't get caught, but I was doing it. There was a little sports bar next to a restaurant, a little diner, and it would serve military underage, and we all snuck off to it. In fact, I met my first Navy boyfriend there, actually. So, like, there's a lot of adventures that happened during that time period. And I think for me, like I said, I got into a lot of shenanigans, but, and I will always say I had more fun in the military than anybody should have had because I was keeping up shenanigans. But nobody wanted to go to Great Lakes. Nobody wanted to be on North Chicago. That was the base of the training command base, right? So that's where everybody was going to boot camp at the time, right? Coming through Great Lakes. So it was the strictest base, or it had, at least it had the reputation to be. So nobody wanted to go there. So I was there all 5 years. So there wasn't much for me to do but get into shenanigans. And I think that's, and a lot of my friends did get caught up and got on restriction and got bussed down and a lot of stuff like that. I did watch it happen to people that I knew and that I was cool with, but I think it's kind of part of the culture is, we were young and sort of getting into things because we had our first taste of freedom, our first apartments, our first cars, like all of that stuff. So I don't think that is too abnormal, everything you went through. What I do think is abnormal is the curriculum and how it was instructed to you. That's a concern for
Oh
sure.
yeah, I think they do that because they had like a thick binder to get through in a very short period of time, but they also understood that there's supposed to be a hands-on component outside of the curriculum. So for them it was like, they told us very early on like, yeah, it's good knowledge to know. It's a good baseline, but they were like, you're going to learn everything you need to know once you get to the fleet. So you basically just need to pass. And if you can at least pass, then you can get out to the fleet and you can learn more from there. And so I have mixed feelings about it now because I feel like when I actually got out to the fleet, I felt very, very confused. So like I didn't know anything and I didn't even understand the basics. And so
God.
yeah, I probably would approach the curriculum a little differently because even at my second command when I went organizational level, a lot of the stuff, the basics they teach you in A school, they do still apply in certain
Mhm.
ways. And so that was their idea of it was you don't need it, but they hadn't been at every single command, so they don't know that for sure. So yeah, I think they took away from the education experience quite a bit, but it's what it is.
So tell me about, after A school and going through your duty stations. I mean, it sounds like right out of the gate, boot camp didn't prepare you, A school didn't prepare you. How the hell did you get through your career?
That's a good question because I remember when you get to Whidbey Island is 2 hours from Seattle. So there's already a weird component of like flying into the SeaTac airport. It's a 2 hour shuttle ride up to Whidbey Island. I got to Whidbey Island at 2 o'clock in the morning, I want to say. And it was like your standard Washington weather. It was raining, it was windy, it was dark. And my barracks it was like it wasn't an outdoor barracks, but it was like an open concept, like there's a courtyard in the middle and the rooms were like they're set up in like a almost like a rectangular shape, I think I want to say. And so you had to kind of get through this gate to get into the courtyard to walk up to the barracks rooms. And so first experience right off the bat getting there, this like drunk guy comes up and he doesn't want to let me in the gate. I'm there with my sponsor. She picked me up from the gateway where the shuttle dropped me off. And this drunk guy's like just being weird and rude and like overly sexual. And she was like, listen, I'm a second class. Leave me alone. I'm just trying to get my sailor into her barracks room. Like, no. Yeah. First experience, right? When I got there and really, really went out of her way. And so that was the first like little tinge, right? But it didn't completely break me. I was still very much trying to get qualified. I was just working against, the powers that be. And so my next step was that I really wanted to get my nursing prerequisites out of the way so I could apply for the nurse corps. So then, my next LPO very much supported that endeavor because if I made nurse corps, it made him look really good. He's one of those guys that's motivated by what makes him look good. Used it to my advantage. It is what it is. I went to school full time. I was still working. I had them put me on nights. And so I don't know how I did this, but I was doing an online class, 2 in-person classes. I was driving half an hour to class in the morning in Mount Vernon at the college campus there. So half an hour, I'd have my morning class. I'd have a little bit of a period in between. I'd have my early afternoon class, and then I would drive back, eat something really quick, change, go to work, stay at work till like 1 o'clock in the morning, wake up the next day, do it over again. My classes were Monday through Friday. And so I was running on very little sleep at this time, getting it done. Somehow I still passed with all A's. And I applied to the nurse corps. And on top of this, I guess I should mention also too, to apply for an officer program, there's a lot more than just doing the college classes. You got to put in that whole packet. So I was doing some on the job training at the Naval Health Clinic. Basically got 100 hours of that. I had a mentor that was a nurse. She was the head director on that base, and she was my mentor, and she was helping me apply. Got that too. I really put in a very good package. I ended up between me and another girl at my command that put in the MECIT package. She got selected over me as number 1 at the command because she made chief faster than I did, and because I had an NJP on my record. And so it didn't matter that I did the 100 hours and she did none. It didn't matter that my GPA was almost a 4.0 and hers was like a very low 3 point something. From a Navy perspective, she was more golden than I was. So it didn't matter what I did. I wouldn't have picked up that time. And so that finding out that, was like that next tinge that did it for me. But then when I was on my first detachment in 2018, I went to Bahrain. I was on deck with mostly males. I want to say there was a handful of other females. In maintenance, I think there may have only been one other female. But that's where I really got that glimpse of how poor leadership is, especially in an environment that's away from home. I had one sailor that was with us, and he was very, very derogatory towards women when we would drive up to the gate because we lived in a different area than where we worked. So when we would have to go into work, we would have to drive there. And he would always be making derogatory comments about this gate guard. And I approached him and I was like, hey, can you not talk like that? Like, I don't appreciate it. It makes me uncomfortable. And he wouldn't stop. And so then I approached the leadership and I said, hey, can you talk to him? Because it wasn't just that. There were other things. I don't remember what all they were, but they told me that's just how he is. So we're just going to let it slide. And after that, I mean, I really liked my chiefs from like a maintenance perspective. I thought they were very good about listening to us and not making us work excessively long hours. But it was like that one little piece where I wasn't heard as a person that made me feel like, you know what, I don't want to be part of this organization anymore. Unfortunately for me, right before that detachment, the military had just come up with a thing where you had to match up your rotation date to your end of contract date or vice versa. And I had extended because I was putting in for the nurse corps program. And so I was like, hey, I really want to cancel this extension, which they told me I could. They lied to me, of course. Go figure. And they wouldn't let me cancel because that's the point. Right before 4 years is where I decided like this isn't for me. And I experienced this several times when I was in not being heard, and I really, really didn't appreciate it because it at the end of the day, when I first got to that command, everyone worked together. Everyone listened to each other's ideas and collaborated. The LPO was out there working on the plane. He took input from other people. He put people on detachments based off of what he thought was best for their career. And I really appreciated that. So when it got replaced by leadership that was just like, oh, we're just filling slots with names, and we're going to send you to Bahrain because it's the worst debt site, and we're going to send so and so to Greece because it's the best one. I never got to. So Greece, Japan, Bahrain were the 3 debt sites. Bahrain got paid the least per diem, and it was in the desert. Greece had the best per diem and it was in Greece. So
Right.
everyone wanted to go there. And then Japan was like that happy medium. There's just a lot more work in Japan because they had 2 planes out there instead of one. So Greece was like the place to be. And they never sent me there. They put my name down and they at a point almost used it against me because they wanted me to get, when I hit the point where I was like, I don't care anymore, they would use that Greece detachment against me and be like, oh, hey, if you get your CDI, we'll send you to Greece. And I was like, no, like you send me to Bahrain. I went to Bahrain twice the entire time I was in Japan once. And I was supposed to go to Greece, but they switched me from Greece to Japan 2 weeks before I left because I was the most qualified worker and I didn't have my CDI, even though as an E4, I was not required to get my CDI. It was optional, but they wanted me to have it. So the thing that I like to highlight when I talk about my Sea Duty command is that Japan detachment, because my Japan detachment is where I hit probably the lowest of lows when I was serving. And the reason is because of the leader that I had at the time. And so this guy, another guy that had a problem with women, I mean, he'd spend most days in there talking about his baby mama and how he couldn't stand her. And, he was the LPO of our shop at one point, and all these E1s are in there, and he's just talking about his baby mama, would very unprofessional. Even as the LPO, he'd come in every morning and look at the stock market on his computer with all the men in the shop while the women were getting the stuff ready for the day. Like that's the kind of guy he was. So, when we had gone out to Japan together, I was very much like, you know what, I'm going to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. I'm in this situation for 3 months. I might as well make the best of it. So I was not rude to him by any means. When we were on our way out, we stopped through Alaska. I hung out with him. I talked to him a little bit. We had good conversation. And I was like, maybe this isn't going to be that bad. Well, when we ended up getting out to the detachment site, this qualification as a collateral duty inspector, he got it. It was in routing as we were flying out to Japan. So he had never actually worked in this capacity before. So he didn't really know what he was doing. Keep in mind, when we were back at home base, instead of going out and working on the plane, he'd always be in the shop playing on his phone because he was a first class and they got away with that. And so he knew nothing about anything. And so that's why they sent me out there with him, was to help him. And so I really tried to be in this helping capacity where I was like, hey, you know what? I'll take care of these things because I'd been on a detachment before. I knew how it worked. I was like, I'll take care of this and then I'll make sure the stuff gets done. But he didn't like that. He very much felt like I was undermining him and that I was trying to take over his job. And he got very upset with it. And he was just one of those guys. That's just how his attitude. Yeah, very much ego. And and even at the debt site, we would start our pre-flight in the morning. It would always be 2 hours, and everyone was supposed to go out to the plane that was supposed to help with pre-flight. He'd sit inside while me and the in-flight technician, IFT, we would go out to the plane. He'd come out later, and at that time we'd already put everything in for pre-flight. We're already starting to troubleshoot stuff. Like, nothing ever goes well in pre-flight. So it's always a go, 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 go till that plane's off the ground. But he would want us to let him know everything we did, and he wasn't there. And so, long story short, first of all, I made E5 in Japan. And when I had made E5 afterwards, we went out to a place called White's Beach or something in Okinawa. And he had gotten extremely, extremely inebriated drunk. I think he drank an entire bottle of Ciroc and people kept feeding him beer. Like they're very much egging it on. And I was separating myself because, like I said, I had an ARI. I cannot, not wrong place, wrong time was not an option for me. Like I could not. So I went and I physically separated myself. I went and I sat at a table and I was sitting there with a few other people who weren't drinking. And he comes over with this liter of water and pours it on the table. My phone's on the table, a speaker's on the table, and I lost it. I was like, I don't remember what I said, but I was like, you're a grown ass man. Like why are you not handling your alcohol? And, I was a bad person once again. And another first class was like, he might have some demons that he's facing. And so you need to be nice. And I was like, no, listen, like these people are leaders. And keep in mind, it wasn't just him. Our LPO on that debt, every single night when we would be done with work outside of ours, we stayed at this janky Navy Gateway and in Suites hotel. And there was a little courtyard outside of it. Every single night, everyone would get so incredibly drunk. And he would get so drunk that he would take the bottle and he'd run off into the woods. No one knew where he was till the next morning. They would just be like, oh, he usually shows up in his room. And so we would just rely on that.
Wow.
As hoping he made it back to his room on time every morning. And so I had to separate myself from that. I couldn't hang out with these people. But that was, again, like my example of leadership. But I just remember being in such a bad emotional place because I felt like everything was working against me. And they would ask us every day, "How are you?" And I would constantly say, "I'm not good. I'm not good." They'd kind of laugh it off. And it got to the point where there's one day, and you'll see pictures of me on my social media with this photo because I keep it in my phone as a reminder of that place that I was at and where I'm at now. But I have chains from the plane wrapped around my neck, and I was out there. We were changing out the camera at the tip of the nose of the plane, and I was out there with 10 other, I want to say 10 other people, and right past the nose of the plane is a chain point. And I had gone over there and I wrapped them around my neck like 3 times. And this is not normal for me, by the way. And I was leaning into it. And if you look at the photo, which it's triggering for some people, so I don't put it like out there a lot, but my face literally looks like almost purple. And I didn't do it with the intention of taking my life. I think I just wanted to see if what people would do. Like maybe someone will care enough to see that like I'm not okay. And I think one
Definitely.
person came over and asked, like, "Oh, hey, you good?" And I was like, "Oh, yep." And then he was just like, "Haha, okay," and then like walked away. But I remember thinking in my head, like, man, I could take my life right now with 10 people standing right next to me and no one would do anything.
My
And
God.
yeah, and that's how it was. And so one of my signs of depression is that I sleep in a lot. And I was doing this a lot more on this day. And as I hit to the very end of the debt, I was very much like not working as much. I would just kind of sit in the back of the plane and let my LP or let my CDI do his thing. I'd let everyone take their questions to him because I was like, "You don't want my help? Cool. I'm just going to sit in the back. I'll do the bare minimum." Because I had had a conversation with him one time. He was being very condescending to me. I snapped at him. And, him, myself, and the LPO had gone outside of our maintenance control office to have a conversation. And I told him very cordially, like, "Hey, these are the problems that I have. Like, this is what's wrong." And he agreed. And I was like, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't be talking about you behind your back. You're right. Like, that's not cool of me to do. I will try to be more aware of that." And I was very, very much the bigger person in this moment, as much as I didn't want to be. And then when I told him my problems with him, his response was, "I just don't see it." That's all he said to
Wow.
me. I didn't get an apology. I didn't get a, "Hey, I don't see it, but you know what? I'm going to try to be more aware." All he said was, "I just don't see it." And the LPO even said, "Hey, there's times when I see you doing this." Like, and he's like, "Nope, don't see it." That was all he said. And
Wow.
so, I'm obviously at a point where I feel like I'm very alone. Everyone's drinking. I don't want to drink. I want to go out in town, but I don't want to be associated with this guy because he's very much like a form of negativity for me. And it was just in a really, really bad place emotionally. So the very last day, our very last day of working, I slept in. And I missed because again, job site, living site, different place. Have to drive there. And I was supposed to recover the plane that day. So we rotated out who launched and recovered the plane. And it was me that day on our very last day. And I woke up late from like an afternoon nap and I missed everyone. And so I had gotten in a group chat because we had a group chat between each other to communicate. And I was like, "Hey, the van's still here. I woke up late and I didn't get a response." So I got dressed really quick. I went outside, vans were gone. In that time that I was outside, they called my hotel room phone, but I missed it because I was outside. I didn't know that they called my hotel room phone. I came in and I saw the little red light flashing, but I didn't think anything of it. I was just like, "Oh, well, I got to get to work. I got to catch this plane. I'm just going to walk." And so I walked the like mile or two or whatever it was to get to work. And when I showed up to work, the first thing they did was my CDI, that same guy that I was clashing with, slapped a counseling chit on the table in front of me as I'm getting my yellow vest ready to go because plane's going to be there in like 5 minutes. I need to get out in position to catch this plane because I still made it in time. I
Right.
literally like nothing was wrong other than the fact that I didn't get in the van with them and I wasn't there on time. Slaps the counseling shit down in front of me because I was late to work. And who's like, "Oh, you can read over this. Ask me if you have any questions." I just signed it and I walked outside. I was like, "I don't have time to read this. I don't have time to ask questions." And I really didn't appreciate that he slapped the counseling shit down in front of me without asking me if I was okay or having a conversation surrounding it. And realistically, I didn't want to have that conversation with him anyway. But what's ironic about this is there were several times that we were supposed to be in work at a certain time to do maintenance, and he wouldn't show up, and he would be argumentative and be like, nope, we're supposed to be here at 2 o'clock. And everyone else
My
was there at one
God.
o'clock. And yeah, so that's just how my experience was. And when I came back from that debt, I took 30 days of leave to try to decompress because I was like, this is just a lot. And I was not in a good place. And, that's when I really started like getting into therapy and stuff because of that. My last little bit at that command, because there's so many stories associated with this command, but the reason I left that command is because one of my coworkers, probably a year after Japan, one of my coworkers had taken his life.
Oh
And
my
a few
God.
days prior to him taking his life, he was out on the plane with me and another coworker. She was requalifying on her CDI. He was QA. And he was like talking to us about a few things that, were going on in his personal life, which was very out of character for him because he was always like a very goofy, lighthearted kind of guy, a little abrasive, but I'd known him since he was at my shore duty command too. I'd known him for a while. And when he took his life, it hit me so incredibly hard that I could not be in the workplace. I was getting panic attacks, and no one in my leadership understood why I couldn't be there. And they were so horrible with trying to accommodate. I remember telling my chief, like, hey, I will work with you and you can put me in the hangar somewhere. I'll work in admin, I'll work in safety, anywhere. And keep in mind, they move people to safety all the time. I said, I cannot be in QA and I cannot be in the AT shop, but you can send me somewhere else if you really need me to be here. He was like, sorry, can't do that. We won't send you out to the plane, but you can do paperwork in the shop. I was like, do you really want someone doing paperwork? That's not okay. And I know I'm skipping around a lot here, but the point that I want to make is that leadership, leadership at the command is what made or broke it for me. And it ended up breaking it because when I went to limited duty, which I didn't have to, by the way, like had they just worked with me and let me go to a different area, I probably would have stayed at that command until I separated from the military. I would have had my time to heal and I would have gone back to my job. And who knows, maybe I would have even stayed in for another short tour. I don't know what my feelings would have been, but I ended up getting orders to a completely different command in limited duty because my command was not accommodating at all. The leaders didn't understand. They didn't try to understand. They just knew that to make me look good, I can't let a sailor not be at work. I had a flight doc write me 2 weeks of SIQ to not show up to work because he understood. Mental health didn't even understand. I went
Wow.
to mental health begging at the front desk, please write me something so that I don't have to be in my workspace, but I cannot be there and I do not want to go AWOL. And they were like, oh, well, you have an appointment with your psychiatrist in like 2 days. So can you just wait? And I was like, no, I can't. I cannot be there. What do you not understand about this? I'm so grateful that I had a flight doc take compassion and understand enough to write me 2 weeks of SIQ. But I want to make this point that I did not need to take that time away SIQ. I did not need to. I mean, it was very helpful. I did not need to get orders to a different command, but leadership is such a important component of the military.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a city council member in my area the other day and telling him how bad leadership is, and he was blown away. He had no idea. He was like, "It's the military. It's about the leadership's supposed to be top of the tier, top of the line." I said,
Right.
no one is teaching anyone how to be a leader. The leadership principles that I learned when I separated from the military or in my last few years of the military that I went out of my way from a personal development perspective to learn, they're not teaching these things to the leaders in the military. They're just about how am I going to look good? How am I going to make rank? And you're going to respect me because I have more chevrons than you. And at the end of the day, like, no, that's not leadership. That's not leadership at all. And I think my experience at that command would have been different if my leadership was different. And
Absolutely.
yeah, that's the summarized version of it, hitting on kind of like the really major points in my career there. But when I went to Limdu, they were very good in Limdu about giving me the time that I needed for me and allowing me to do what I needed to do to heal. And I'm so grateful that I was able to spend my last year in the military in a Limdu command because it gave me that time to really like decompress and start taking care of me. And a lot of people that leave straight out of like a sea duty command, they're working till the day they leave. They don't have time for them.
Wow.
which can be detrimental to some people. So,
I think
yeah,
so. I think you have to decompress after some certain careers in the military. You can't just, well, they do all the time, but it would be better if you had more time to reacclimate, especially if
oh,
you've
yeah,
been in a war zone. You need
yeah,
time to come back and sort of reacclimate before you just get out and go into civilian life, because that transition
right.
in and of itself is incredibly difficult.
So my transition out of the military, what led to that was a number of things actually. So I had initially signed a 4-year contract with the Navy when I joined in 2015, and I think like most people in the Navy, I wasn't really sure for the beginning of my career. Do I want to do 20 years? Do I not want to do 20 years? I actually tried to go for the MECIP Nurse Corps program for a while when I was in, and there was one path in my mind that had that as a plan, and but then there was another path in my mind that was like, okay, well, what would it look like if I stayed enlisted? But I think what really gave me that push to decide ultimately to get out, which was very, very freeing in my mind when I finally made that absolute decision of like, I'm getting out of the military, was the leadership. And I had gone on my first detachment to Bahrain in 2018. And this was a year before I was supposed to get out of the military. And seeing the way that the leadership handled situations and seeing the environment and the people and the way that just situations were handled, whether they were major or minor situations, and realizing that it was more of a buddy buddy organization. And it might have, in my mind, it might have just been my command at that time, but I really just decided this is not an organization that I want to be a part of long term. Couple examples: when I was in Bahrain, it was just a 4-month detachment that I was on, but there were certain situations. I was one of the very few females in that small group of people. And there was one guy in particular in my group that he would consistently make derogatory comments about this female who was standing watch at the guard at the gate. And she was, I want to say there were reservists that were standing watch at the gates, and he would constantly just say things that made me very uncomfortable. And I brought it up to him. I brought it up to different levels of leadership. And the answers that I kept getting met with were, oh, well, that's just how he is. Leave it alone. It's not that big of a deal. It is what it is. And, I was very, very disappointed that that's what I got, because I did follow the chain of command. I did follow the steps that they tell you to take when there's an issue. And I was getting met with resistance, like I was the problem, like I was complaining. And I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. This is not what I expected it to be. A few months prior to this happening and me making this decision, I'd actually ended up extending 2.5 years on my contract, because the Navy came out with this rule where the EAOS, so the end of active obligated service date, had to match to the PRD. So my rotation date out of my command, the PRD, didn't match the date that I was supposed to get out of the military, and it was leaving gaps in commands. And so the Navy had come out with this rule of, hey, you either match one to the other. So I had to make a very quick decision in a matter of, I want to say it was like 2, 3 days. Do I extend 2.5 years, or do I get out next year? And because at that time I was applying for this nurse corps program, everyone was like, oh, it's going to look really bad if you decide you're going to get out instead of extend. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I guess I'll just extend. And, fast forward a few months later, when I was in this position in Bahrain, and I decided, I actually don't want to extend. I want to get out. My paperwork was still processing. So I was like, hey, can I just cancel this paperwork? Can I just get out in 2019 like I originally intended? And I was told by the career counselor, no, the only way I could cancel it was essentially to re-enlist for longer, which didn't make any sense. And my chain of command on that detachment told me that the only option I had was to get pregnant to get out. And I was like, yeah, I
What?
was like, I'm not doing that. I'm
Wow.
not getting pregnant just to get out of the military, which, by the way, isn't an automatic dismissal from the military anyway.
No.
So I was like, it is what it is. I'll just do the 2.5 years and I'll get out. But yeah, that's what really ultimately led to that decision of me deciding to get out. And the reason that I say it was so freeing is because I really feel like the military has this hold on people, where they feel like if they want to create a career out of the military, that they have to just stay silent, keep to themselves, put their head down, and do their job. Because if you piss off the wrong person, that could exponentially change the trajectory of your entire career, because one person
Yes.
can make that decision that ruins your entire career. And it's unfortunate to say,
Yes.
but it's so true. And
Mhm.
I know you know this from hearing your story on my
Mhm.
podcast, but when I decided that I was ultimately going to get out and I knew that was a thing, I felt like I was in a position where I could now speak up for not only myself, but those around me. And it was very empowering to feel like I can say something and not feel like it's going to hinder my career, because this is not my career. This is just a job that I'm doing for 2.5 years. And I'm still going to do the job, but I know that I'm going to get out. And there's people that are below me that maybe want to make a career out of this, but now I'm in a position where I can stick up for them and I can help them out. And I was able to do that. And I feel really, really good about that part of my career, being able to help out with those E1s and E2s that, they were trying to learn, and they had a leader that was just being a bully, and
Yeah.
saying, hey, go get this tool for me, go do this, because I'd rather sit on a computer when someone's in the middle of trying to learn something. And that actually happened, and it happens all the time. But to be in that position where I was like, hey, I'm getting out, I can help, I can use this for positive, that was very, very empowering.
I can imagine. Like, I want to say a couple of things about what I've heard from you just now. Like, honestly, bad leadership. If there are so many stories, and if I had $1 for every time I had a guest on this podcast tell me about a bad leadership experience, I mean, it was just April, and we know Vanessa Guillen's story. And
Yeah.
again, when you are at a base with bad leadership, it changes the entire experience. Like, I've had stories of some people on this podcast where I can't even believe that their career was true. It was so amazing. I was like, what? Like, is that's even possible? And there are
Yeah.
other people that tell me the stories somewhat similar to what you're saying about the leadership. And it's horrifying and more. Like, you can't even believe how horrific the experience was. So, I have had that experience, but I also experienced doing everything possible to help someone and following the chain of command, and also being treated as if I was a problem for saying the truth and speaking up and trying to stop this sexual harassment from happening.
Yeah.
And nothing was done. And
Yeah.
nothing was done. And that girl tried to take her life, by the way. So, the thing is, I really identify with a lot of what you're saying, and I just wanna point out that I'm a Desert Storm veteran, and you are talking about the teens, the 20 teens, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is, like, some years
Yeah.
difference, and we're
Yeah.
still talking about the same issues that plague a lot of parts of the military and a lot
Yeah.
of different branches of service.
I want to point out something else too, that the leaders on this detachment, they weren't toxic people. And
Mhm.
I think this is where there's a huge disconnect when the big Navy and big military tries to look at leadership. They're thinking that, oh, we're seeking out these toxic people. No, they were great people. They weren't just almost people pleasers. I think that's where there's this like weird gray area with leadership, is that just because someone's a good person doesn't mean that they're a good leader. And leadership principles are not taught in the military the way that they should be. It should be one of the top priorities, in my opinion. But when you end up with this group of people together where maybe everyone's really good friends and the leader doesn't quite know how to be a leader, it can create a toxic environment in certain ways. And it's really unfortunate, because it's not always that black and white, oh, it's just a really toxic person and that's why they're a toxic leader. It might be that, hey, you're a really great person and you do have the best interest of the group in mind. So you might think, and you might think you're doing everything right as a leader, but you're doing certain things wrong, but aren't willing to learn how to right those wrongs, if that makes sense.
Perfect sense. Perfect sense. And it also speaks to what you said about maybe, you're friends with everybody in the group. Cause I also experienced this, but I experienced a good leader. So shout out to my girl, Tyra Gaynor, wherever you are. She was my supervisor and we were very close friends. We had a fantastic friendship, but she was also always able to be the leader and the super. She had that great boundary. And it was clear to me what her boundary was. And out of respect for her and our friendship, I didn't cross it. But there are people, and I have also seen the flip side of that, to where it's all buddy buddy and favoritism and it's toxic. So I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people struggle with that in the military. And that's why I wish there were more leadership courses to teach people how to be a leader in these environments, because we don't know what we don't know. So I'm never going to fault someone for not
Right.
knowing what they don't know, but it did. I mean, it was one of the major determining factors in me deciding to get out. So I imagine how much greater retention would be in the military if the military would invest into something like leadership courses, teaching people how to create those boundaries or those balances between friends and work, because it is such a unique environment where people live together for a period of time, work together. So now you have to create boundaries. And a lot of people never learn these things and they're never taught it and they're expected to figure it out. And the military is operated on this rank based form of respect for so long, but we live in a day and age now where respect does not equal rank. So something needs to change.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people go into the military knowing that it's rank based and they can be like shitbirds, right? Like they can be the worst scum of the earth people, but they know that once they get enough on their collar or on their shoulder or on their arm, like you got to respect them, you know?
Yep.
And sometimes those people are the most undeserving of
Yeah.
respect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely. But it just creates animosity, is what it does
Mhm,
at the end of the day. And like I said, it just goes back to like, I'm only obligated to serve a contract for so long.
mhm,
That length of time is not forever.
right.
So if I feel like in that 4 year time period, 6 year time period, if I feel like I am not respected, I am not going to continue to stay in. Now, not everyone does that. There are people that will continue to stay in because the pros have to outweigh the cons, and
Mhm,
everyone's situation is different, right? But then we see a lot of these people that do decide to stay in, taking their lives, attempting suicide. Maybe they are self medicating, they're drinking heavily. Some people are doing drugs. I mean, these are the
big
things that we
time.
don't talk about.
Mhm,
And a lot of the things that are legal, like drinking and smoking, they just get swept under the rug and no one recognizes it as a cry for help. That is the military behavior. That's just what is expected and anticipated because everyone does it. And it's really, really sad.
It is sad. You know what? That just made me think of this episode I did, and I think it was the last season. There's 8 of them now, so they're like, I'm trying to keep it straight. But Asaya's episode, if you look for that, it's all about the dangers of drinking in the military and what this young woman went through and how it changed the trajectory of her life and what she's had to overcome. And I keep in touch with her, and she has just blossomed into the most amazing woman after doing that interview and releasing a lot of the shame that was associated with her circumstances of drinking in the military and what happened to her. And it's been beautiful to see. So I think that having that kind of culture, it's in a way toxic if abused. But when you look at why people are abusing alcohol, a lot of times it is that escapism, that misery, that just trying to find relief. So it's
Yep.
a big problem that I think ties into the work that you do with mental health, big
Yep.
time, you know,
Absolutely.
big time.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, so I know that you, with your podcast and the things that you do working with veterans and mental health, you've had to go on a journey to get there. So, what was your transition out of the military like?
I don't want to say it was easy because it was far from easy. Life really threw me a major curveball right when I was getting out of the military. So everything was set up perfectly. And I was in LIMDU. Being in LIMDU, I'm incredibly grateful for this time period because it gave me a solid year to just focus on me and be able to transition out with my own pace. And I was able to start school. My command was generous enough to actually let me start nursing school while I was still active duty, which is, most people know that's an in-person type of thing. So typically when you are active duty, you don't have the time to be able to go to school full time and in an in-person thing. Now, this was during COVID time, so a little unique again in that not every single day was in person, but it still required my time. and it still required me to be away from work. So I was able to do my first quarter of nursing school in the last year of my time served. While doing that, I was still working in the Navy and still doing, my duties. And by duties, I was limb dues, so I didn't really have that many duties. But I was the watch bill coordinator for the entire command, so the base watch bill coordinator actually. And so I was doing this major project trying to fix their watch program. I have this thing where I like take on major projects in like every work environment I'm in. It's just like it comes naturally to me. So I was working on this massive project, and then I was in school, and everything was going good because I really thrive in that type of an environment. So a few months before I got out, I found out I was pregnant. Was not expecting it. Was not in my plans. My plan was, hey, wait till I finish nursing school right around the time that I turned 30, and then we can look at that part of life. But happened unexpectedly, and also COVID, with that being a thing, they started, creating the mandatory vaccines in Washington state. And I was pregnant, so I didn't want to have to get a vaccine or really put anything in my body. It was very much limiting,
For
like
sure.
Tylenol, everything, right? Like I was wanted to go as natural as possible. So I was actually not allowed to continue doing nursing school. And I was supposed to literally transition into quarter two of nursing school like 2 3 days after I got out of the Navy. And so before I even got to this point of transitioning out, after I found out I was pregnant, I was trying to figure out and weigh my options. And I remember talking to my chief, and I was like, well, what do I do? I mean, what are my options, I guess? And he was like, well, you can do a maternity tour if you would like. We can just keep you here. You can still get your paycheck, and then you can get out after you have your baby. Weighing the pros and cons of that in my head, I was like, I don't really know if I want to do that, because then I still have to worry about the Navy, right? Like I want to
Mhm.
just, if I'm going to have a baby, I just want to be able to focus on being a mom. I've already mentally prepared myself to get out. I don't think I want to continue in this organization that does not align with my personal values. And so I still decided to get out despite knowing that I was having a baby a few months after I got out, despite knowing that nursing school probably wasn't going to be a thing. I did try to stay in nursing school, but at the end of the day, my clinicals were going to be 12 hours long. They're going to be on the weekends. I was heading into my third trimester. It just was not going to work out. And so I was like, you know what? We're just going to drop nursing school altogether. I will just focus on this next chapter of my life. And so it was hard for me because I really was focusing very much on this plan A, which my plan A was I'm going to get out, I'm going to go to nursing school, I'm going to focus on school, and then I'm going to have my nursing degree. And that's going to set me up for the rest of my life. Right. Well, that completely got swept out from underneath me. And so now I'm having to figure out what the next step is. So I did have a network marketing business that I was building on the side while I was in the Navy. I was in the health and wellness sector, and I didn't really feel like my major passion in life was health and wellness. I learned a lot of things from network marketing that I'm incredibly grateful for, and they gave me the skills to be able to be where I'm at today. But I was like, do I see myself doing this full time all day, every day? No, I don't. Now, on top of that, I was also dealing with really bad antenatal depression. And this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, is the depression that happens during pregnancy.
Mhm.
So, the
Pregnant.
postpartum thing, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's
Yeah.
really hard because all these people are excited and all these people,
Mhm.
want to talk about the baby. And I just like, I could not mentally deal with it. And I kept trying to remind myself to give myself grace, because I experienced multiple changes all at once between
Yes.
transitioning out of the military and not being able to go to nursing school and trying to figure out life, and the changes in my body and all the hormones. And
Yes.
but it was really, really difficult, and I wasn't able to get my unemployment for a few months because something, I think my DD 214 or something. So that was another fiasco. My VA disability, I wasn't able to even finish my exams because they wanted x-rays, and I was pregnant, so I couldn't get x-rays. I mean, there were just so many things that I truly felt like were working against me.
Right.
And it was really hard. And then losing $6,000 a month of a paycheck from
Yeah.
the Navy. And, it's like being at not, I don't feel like it was the lowest of lows for me, because I feel like I was more prepared from the personal development work that I had done while I was in to handle it. But I also didn't feel like I was handling it because it was such a weird phase of life for me. And again, I couldn't really go get a job because I was about to have a baby soon. So it's like the perfect storm of things all happening all at once. And I really felt like once a few months had passed out of my time in the Navy, that things would go back to normal. But what I've really analyzed now, it's been almost 2 years since I've got out, a year and a half. I just now feel like I'm in a place where I'm starting to feel quote unquote normal because normal for me in my mind was going back to what I used to be, right? But I'm not that person anymore.
Right.
And so understanding that like growth and healing and change and all these things that create this person that I've never met before. And that can be incredibly scary because I a lot of times will in my mind go back to what's comfortable, which can be the unhealthy and the trauma and the stagnation and the things that I don't want, but my body's just used to it. And so, yeah, transition was difficult and it's not talked about enough. And, all these people that are in the military want to give advice to people that are transitioning, but they've never transitioned before. And then everyone's transition experience is different. So,
Mhm.
a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people who've gotten out, they've gotten amazing job offers right away and they do incredibly well. I've talked to people who have got out and they just moved back home with their parents and they live that simple life and they're happy with that. I've also talked to people who have gotten out and everything's just gone,
Yeah,
like to the
upside
wayside.
down.
And yeah, and that's how it felt with me. So, I think it's one of those things that it needs more attention from the military and probably from the veteran side too, if they could somehow work together. I don't know, but my experience was very, very different than I thought it would be because I had envisioned what it would look like for like a year or two before it actually happened. And that is not at all what happened with me.
Amazing. I had no clue what I was gonna do what I was gonna do. I remember that I went to work at a temp agency that was I think they still have them, but I did that and I went to corporate because I thought, I'm about to take on corporate America. But before I got out, I think I was just kind of bitter because leaving the pharmacy and coming out of the military and going into the civilian world as a pharmacy tech when I had all the privileges and I was a proper pharmacist in the military, and then coming and like looking at the difference and the pay and all of that and then in order for me to continue on and be a proper pharmacist I had to go to school for what 3 4 years to do what I had been doing for 3 years already. So
Yeah.
I was kind of like a little angry and bitter like that the civilian sector did not make it easier. Like why in the world would they not accept my military training as enough? Why was
Right.
there no just like national certification test that I could take because I knew the answers because I've been doing it that would
Right.
qualify me to do my job that I've been doing for the last 3 years as a civilian. So I wasted a lot of time admittedly being angry and frustrated about that and not putting a real plan in place. And I was lucky because I did temp agencies actually kept me afloat for a while as I learned corporate. And then I started to work my way up at companies and stuff like that until I left when I got pregnant and also suffered pregnancy depression.
Yeah.
So I felt that in my soul when you were talking
Yeah.
about that. Like, and I remember I read this book by Jenny McCarthy. I think it's called Belly Laughs. I would recommend it, but I was pregnant in 2006 and not just out of the military. It had been a while, but I was also at a similar transition. I was at another transition, kind of like
Yeah.
you were. And it just hit me. And I couldn't understand why I felt so bad because all my life I believed that being pregnant was going to be like one of the greatest joys of my life. And I wanted the kid and I was excited about having a baby, but I was miserable. And
Yeah.
nobody got it. Like I didn't, like everything about me changed. I didn't wear makeup. I just didn't leave my house. Like there was a lot of things that were there. I developed like some of my old eating disorder issues came back. Like it was a lot, going on. So I really have a lot of compassion for what you experienced and what you were going through, because there's not a lot of people talking about that. They didn't even talk about postpartum, which I also had, um,
Yeah.
but for like 3 years.
Yeah.
But they were just talking about that stuff, and they're just now it's an open conversation, and we're all very aware of it, and people have much more compassion for it now. I think a lot thanks to Brooke Shields. But like pregnancy depression, people really don't talk about that still. So reading that book was like so important to my being able to accept that and realize that it was temporary and feel less alone, which is important to me for people to experience, which is why I do this podcast. And I felt so much less alone in the fact that I was miserable openly. I will tell you, I was miserable in my first pregnancy. It was so difficult for me. And I didn't know that other people felt that way till I read that
Yeah.
book. And now here you are
Yeah.
telling me
Yeah.
about it too. But
Yeah.
like you're probably one of 5 women I've ever talked to about it. So
Yeah. Yeah. I remember I posted on Instagram about it a handful of times, and I feel like a lot of women could relate, and it's just not talked about. Another thing that I didn't mention that I experienced towards the end of pregnancy is I got Bell's palsy the very last month of pregnancy. And so that was another challenge
girl,
that I faced that was really, really, really hard for me, because your face is something that a lot of people we take for granted, right? And then all of a sudden, like overnight, it started with like my nostril. My nostril felt weird, like I couldn't flare it. And I thought something was happening. And then, my husband was like, "Oh no, like I'm sure it's just like something. Yeah, no, you're fine." And I was like, "Okay." Well, I wake up the next day, and then like literally, I couldn't do anything. Like to this day, I still don't have full function back in my face, but I was completely paralyzed
my
on the
God.
right side of my face, and it's hard because in pregnancy, there's certain things that a lot of women do, like maternity photo shoots. Like I for a long time I wanted the birth photographer and all that stuff. And now looking back, I'm like, well, I'm glad I didn't, because I think for me it would have just been a reminder of like a feeling that I didn't want to feel. I do have photos from my birth that my husband took on my phone, but it's just not that was a different experience for me too, and was very, very hard to deal with, because it's like one of those things when it's on your face, when something happens, it doesn't matter what it is. If you have a black eye, or you get burnt or something, I mean, people stare, and people want to say something, and some people do say something, and it's like, I was already dealing with all these things, and it was just like, this is one more thing now. And
My
that for a
goodness.
while I stopped showing up on the internet. I stopped taking pictures of myself, and I really don't have very many pictures of me and my baby in the beginning of her life, in the first few weeks of her life, because I just didn't feel like me as it was. But then I also, had this other thing that I was dealing with that there's really no cure for. I mean, they gave you like steroids and, some cocktail of medications to try to help, but they don't know that that actually helps. It's just kind of
Right.
an experimental thing, and all the doctors would say is it'll go away in 2 weeks, and it didn't go away in 2 weeks, it continued to stay. And so, yeah, that was another thing that I forgot to mention, in my story, that I was also dealing with, that really, really contributed to that depression piece too. But, the things women deal with in pregnancy that are, I'm sure, common for a lot of women, they just aren't talked about, because women's health and women's issues are still like a few things are still
Girl.
very like taboo, and they're not
Mhm.
talked about, and it's very frustrating.
It is. And so I'm just listening to all of this, and I'm like, this is all very recent, because I know your baby's still a baby. Like she's not
Yeah.
tiny, but she's little.
Yeah.
And how on earth did you decide to start a podcast and start a crusade for mental health? Right, I mean, I can kind of get why you would get behind like the mental health and from your
Yeah.
story, right?
Yeah.
But like, how did you get the wherewithal, if you will, to like just be like, you know what? I'm going to start a podcast and I'm going to just start helping people.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, the podcast was very therapeutic in a way, but also it was something for me to do. So you know how I said that I go to environments and I just naturally find something that I can make better. So the
Mhm.
podcast was kind of that thing for me because there for a while when I got out of the military, I was doing nothing. I was very stagnant in my life. I was sleeping until noon every single day and staying up in the night. And I was, not eating very well. And I was just existing. And so the podcast was something for me outside of everything else in life. And so it was a way for me to be able to give back. But also, it's kind of like you said, with not feeling alone. When I hear other people's stories and I hear what other people went through, it helps me in a way to know that I'm not alone because I've had a lot of women that have those sexual assault stories, or I've had women that come on and they have bad leaders, or even men that had similar experiences to what I experienced. And so I think the thing was is in the mental state that I was in, I started the podcast knowing that it's not perfect, but I'm just going to start. And it's interesting when I go back and I listen to my beginning episodes, you can tell that I was in that space where I was like, it's not perfect, but I'm just going to start.
Me
And
too,
it's been
girl.
really cool watching it evolve from there because there's things that, you just kind of have to learn. Like you can't learn it from a course or a program. You just have to do it.
Mhm.
And that's where I've been at. And there for a while, I was doing everything myself. I finally branched out and got an editor to be able to help me out with that piece of it. But yeah, it's always been such a passion that that's what keeps me going. Even when things get really rough, I will always make time to make sure I get that episode out every Monday. So I'm very passionate about it.
That's amazing. And I mean, I was on the show, but I actually happen to think that it's a very good show. And I highly recommend it. Your story doesn't end here. Go listen to it and support your girl, Rachel, because you're doing good things. And so I know that you have more projects coming up. So do you want to share a little bit about those?
Yeah, so my big project that I am focusing majority of my energy into right now is a local community event. So for anyone that is in Whidbey Island, Washington, or really anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, you're more than welcome to travel. It's called Save a Life event, and the reason it's called Save a Life is because the focus is saving lives. There's so many suicides that happen in the military in general, but Whidbey Island, Washington. Last I talked to one of the funeral directors around here, I asked him if you could estimate how many people take their lives every year off of this tiny base on Whidbey Island. How many would you estimate? And he said probably 8 to 12. He's like, I don't have the exact statistics,
Goodness.
but he said probably 8 to 12 a year. And I was like, that's insane.
Yeah.
And so I decided to name the event Save the Life because I think that it's an important thing and it breaks that stigma a little bit more because it brings to the surface these issues that people don't want to talk about. But this event is going to be a private film screening of a documentary. It's called Stranger at Home. Strangerathome.org is their website. And the director was able to get with a couple different cast members who are able to share different stories about what mental health is really like in the military and give the inside scoop. Now, in my opinion, I think that it just scratches the surface. I don't think that it goes as deep as I know it to be, but it's a start and it opens up the dialogue for that conversation. And their goal is to create legislative changes to be able to establish a mental health core. With that, we're also looking to create a integration program in the community. The San Diego Veterans Coalition group down in San Diego, they created this reintegration program that they implemented down in Southern California. They're looking to bring it to other communities around militaries across the nation. And so, doing a keynote and bringing up the possibility of establishing a reintegration program, which I think that very much goes hand in hand with mental health, especially, from my own story, from other stories that I've heard, the transition out of the military directly impacts the mental health of service members and vets. And so, my greater vision with this is to actually have a hub, a physical spot for vets active duty to hang out, to have mental health resources, leadership resources, and just have a space for our people. Because yes, there's the VFWs. Yes, there's, all these little things that were, I really feel like created to be more tailored towards the older veteran. And I know it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be for all vets, but there is the generational thing. Like, and I think there will be
Yeah.
for a long time because we
Mhm.
went through different experiences. But yes, this event is September 30th. It's going to be at the Oak Harbor High School in Oak Harbor, Washington, located on Whidbey Island. So that's the big project that I'm working on, raising sponsorship funds for it right now. And with that, still just building awareness of the issues that are being faced within this community, but also the entire military.
So, how do we support your project?
So the website is called savealifeevent.com, and there is a sponsor tab on there. So anyone that wants to contribute monetary sponsorship funds, just go to that website, click on the sponsor tab. All funds are being routed through our fiscal sponsor, and so that makes them tax deductible. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. And other than that, if you can't donate monetarily, just sharing the event, it helps so much. The word of mouth marketing, that referral marketing, that just means the world, and it's extremely helpful. So just being able to share that link with friends, family, for anyone that does want to contribute or help, or just continue to share about what the mission is, that would help exponentially.
Well, I will put all of the links down in the description box of this episode. So when you're reading what the show is about, scroll down and you will see how to contact Rachel, how to support this cause. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing cause, how to donate. It'll all be there for you to show some love to your veteran sister. So with that, I have one final question for you. And that is, from everything that you've experienced, from your military experience and your transition out and now life as a veteran, what advice would you have for your female veteran sisters coming up behind you?
I would say have a plan, but be flexible with your plan. Don't think that, life is just one direction. Our life is always fluid and things are always changing, and that's okay. That's how life goes. The military trains us to believe that that's not how life goes. And that's what can make that transition process out of the military, or just military life in general, more difficult than it needs to be. So having that open mind and understanding that you can do and be anything you want to be in this life, but do not limit yourself to one thing, because at the end of the day, limiting yourself is going to create this spiral of mental health issues that, that close off the door to the wonderful things that we can experience in life. But if you're ever in a position where you feel like it's too much, where life is overwhelming, and we all experience this, you're not alone in experiencing it. Reach out to someone, ask for help. If you need to just take space for yourself and cut off the world, do that. Do not ever, ever, ever feel guilty for doing something that lights your soul on fire, or doing something just for you. Because at the end of the day, you matter more than anyone else in this entire universe, because you are all you will ever have.
Wow. Well said. That is some great advice. And I love that. You are all you'll ever have. You are the most important person in the universe. I like it. I like it a lot.
Thank
I'm
you.
going to take that in as well. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing time with me and sharing your story with me. Every single story matters. And I've just loved the opportunity to connect with you and hear what your experience was. So thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And where can we follow you specifically? I know we know how to get a hold of your mission and your cause and support that. But if we want to follow along with your personal journey, where do we do that?
So the podcast, everything is YSDEH. If you want to follow the podcast, so Instagram _YSDEH. It's just the acronym for Your Story Doesn't End Here. Also on Facebook, the website's also ysdeh.com. If you want to follow along on my personal journey, my Instagram is usually where I'm the most present for that. And it's just my first name dot last name, Rachel.Oswalt. That's where I post more about me, my family, what I'm working on, the projects I'm doing. There's always something different happening every single day. But that's where you can find me most visible is on my Instagram page personally.
Fantastic. And again, that will be in the show notes. Scroll down and you will find it. And again, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I appreciate you guys so much. Please continue to share these episodes. They're spreading, it's growing. So tell everybody about it. Tell your non-military female friends, because women in general just should know what we experience, right? And it's very, very good stories, I think. All of our stories matter. And it definitely, I think, can educate the world and women about what we experience, you know. One of my previous guests, Alicia, she said it was infotainment. And I think I like that. So please spread the word. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm really hardly ever on there at FemVet Podcast, or you can follow me on Instagram at the Female Veterans Podcast, and just keep supporting the podcast. I appreciate you. I love you guys. I'll talk to you next time.